Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. She was only a girl when the whispers began. Her stomach swelled in the small wooden shack where no one outside dared to knock. People in town noticed, of course. They saw the way she avoided the sunlight, the way her eyes seemed to carry a weight no child should bear. But no one asked questions. In a place where everyone's blood ran too close, silence was safer than truth. The girl's name is barely remembered now, almost lost in the dust of America's forgotten backroads. But the story, that still lingers, haunting those who stumbled across it. Because she was not only carrying a child, she was carrying a secret so grotesque it shattered the line between family and prison. Pregnant by her own father, and by her own brother. It sounds impossible, a nightmare whispered into existence. Yet every piece fits together like a puzzle we were never meant to see. Her life unfolded inside a family that believed outsiders were poison, that the only blood pure enough was their own. What they called loyalty, the world would call horror. Imagine her, barely 14, her childhood stolen by men who were supposed to protect her, her father, drunk on power and superstition, treating her body as inheritance, her brother, groomed into silence, following the only path he was taught. Their house reeked of rot and shame, yet behind those crooked doors, this became their normal. The girl never chose it. She never asked, but her womb became the battleground for their sickness. And the child, that child would carry the marks of inbreeding carved into its very bones, a cruel reminder that blood, when twisted, becomes a curse. The people in town whispered it under their breath. That baby should never have been born, and yet it was, a living scar, carried forward into a world too afraid to speak its name. You weren't supposed to hear this story. You weren't supposed to know what happened in that house, but tonight we open the door to it, slowly, carefully, because once you see inside, you can't look away. They called it poverty, but it was more than that. Families like hers were hidden in the folds of America's forgotten landscapes, places where paved roads turned to dirt and neighbors stopped coming by generations ago. In these hollowed-out towns, the rules of the outside world dissolved. Survival wasn't about laws or morals. It was about keeping the family line closed no matter the cost. Her father had grown up under the same roof, raised on the belief that outsiders brought danger. Marry within, keep the bloodline strong. That was the mantra. But what started as tradition decayed into obsession. By the time he became a man, he had already blurred the line between protector and predator. The daughter never stood a chance. She was not seen as a child, she was seen as a vessel. And the brother? He was born into that same twisted doctrine, learning early that his role was not to question, but to obey. The mother, silent and broken, drifted through the background like a ghost, unable or unwilling to intervene. It wasn't one person's crime. It was the entire family's sickness, passed down like an heirloom no one wanted, but no one dared to shatter. The girl's pregnancy was more than a physical burden. It was a living reminder of betrayal, growing heavier with each day. Her body carried not just a child, but the crushing weight of shame, and the townsfolk, though they whispered, did nothing. Everyone knew, but no one interfered. Why? Because confronting it meant acknowledging what they had long chosen to ignore, that this wasn't the only family like hers. Small rural towns hid many such secrets. Houses left in disrepair, children who looked too much like their uncles, voices that didn't quite sound right. People muttered about bad stock or cursed families, but those words were shields to avoid saying the truth. Generations of inbreeding had left scars too deep to erase. The girl lived trapped between silence and exposure. If she spoke, the world outside might call it a crime. If she stayed quiet, the nightmare continued. But what power did a young girl have against her father's grip and her brother's complicity? She was caught in a cycle that predated her birth, a wheel that had crushed her mother, her grandmother, and now her. This is not just her story. It's America's hidden wound, one that festers in the forgotten corners where no light dares to reach. And as we go deeper, you'll see how this family's secret was never an isolated tragedy. It was part of a much larger pattern. The child was born in the dead of night, without a doctor, without witnesses, without mercy. The labor tore through the girl's body, and still she was not comforted. Her father stood watch, his presence not protective but oppressive, as though he were guarding property instead of life. Her brother paced outside, torn between guilt and pride, unable to face the cries that echoed from within. When the baby arrived, silence filled the room, silence heavier than the infant's first breath. The mother, frail, trembling, wrapped the child in a torn quilt, her hands shaking as though she already knew what they would all see. The baby's features were unmistakable, the warped echoes of too many generations sharing the same blood. Eyes that didn't align, limbs that seemed too fragile for the world, a mouth that fought to form even the smallest cry. For most families, a birth is hope. For this one, it was a mirror they couldn't look into. Each line of the baby's face revealed the truth they worked so hard to bury. A truth carved into flesh that no amount of silence could erase. The townsfolk learned quickly. Words slipped through whispers passed from one front porch to the next. Some pitied the girl. Others cursed her name as if she were to blame for carrying what was forced upon her, but no one acted. They watched from a distance, horrified but frozen. In those days, exposing the family would mean exposing the entire community, because everyone knew the boundaries of blood had been blurred before. The girl clutched her child as though love could shield it from the stares. She whispered to it in the darkness, promising a world that would never come. For every glance she gave the baby, her father gave one of ownership, as if the cycle had only just begun. And yet, the child survived. Against every odd, against the quiet curses spoken in town, it clung to life. But life, in that egg house, was not salvation. It was a sentence. A breathing reminder that once the walls closed in, escape became impossible. The girl's body healed, but her spirit fractured. She had become both victim and mother, both sister and daughter, trapped in a web too tangled for anyone to untie. And in her silence, a dangerous question lingered. Was this truly the first time, or simply the first time anyone dared to notice? The truth is, families like hers didn't begin with her father. They stretched back generations, their branches folding in on themselves until the family tree was less a tree and more a closed loop. It was a cycle shaped by isolation, geography that cut them off, poverty that chained them, and fear that kept them from reaching outward. They told themselves it was tradition. They told themselves it was survival. But beneath those words was something darker: control. Her grandfather had done the same, and his father before him, each one tightening the circle, convincing themselves that outsiders would corrupt the bloodline, that only by keeping love within could they keep the family pure. But purity, twisted in this way, became poison. With every generation, the blood grew weaker. Children born too early, too sick, too frail. Features that bore the unmistakable stamp of genetics turned against themselves. The girl's story was not an isolated accident. It was the inevitable outcome of years of silence. In small pockets across America, similar stories whispered through the trees, stories towns refused to write down, but which everyone knew. A cousin married to a cousin, an uncle whose daughter was also his wife, children whose family names were so tangled they no longer made sense. You might think this is legend, exaggerated rumor, but the evidence lingers. Hidden graves, medical records sealed away, people whose names vanish from census lists as if they never existed. What happened to the girl was not chance. It was inheritance. She had been born into a cage her ancestors had built, and every door she could have run through had already been locked. Her father didn't invent the sickness. He carried it forward. Her brother didn't break the chain. He became another link in it. And so the baby in her arms was not just her child. It was a legacy, a living embodiment of decisions made long before she was born, Some would say it wasn't the baby's fault. Others would whisper it never should have been allowed to live. But no matter what they thought, the fact remained. This family's secret was not confined to their cabin walls. It was spreading, silently, invisibly through time. Because once a cycle like this begins, it rarely ends with just one child. Years passed, but the walls of that shack held the same darkness. The girl, now older but no freer, continued living under the shadow of her father's rule. She bore the marks of what had been done to her, not only in scars invisible to the eye, but in the way her body was used again and again. It was not love, it was ownership. And with each year, her silence grew heavier, because silence was the only weapon she had left. The child she carried into the world grew, but not like the others in town. Its voice was strange, its body frail, its mind always wandering in ways that unsettled those who saw it. People whispered that the child was a curse, a punishment, but never aloud, never where the father could hear. The brother, too, played his role, hovering close, repeating the cycle of confusion and betrayal that had been pressed into him since birth. For the girl, motherhood was not joy, it was a reminder. Every glance at her child's face was a reflection of the men who had stolen her childhood. And yet, despite it all, she clung to that child, because if she didn't, who would? Love, even in the darkest places, refuses to die. But love could not undo what blood had already written. This is where the story takes its sharpest edge, because by now, people in town knew too much to ignore. Some said the sheriff had been told, others swore church leaders had tried to intervene. But each time, the father reminded them of something. If they exposed him, they would expose the whole community. Too many families had secrets of their own, too many feared what might happen if the outside world came knocking, and so the silence remained. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? Would you have broken the chain, or would you have stayed quiet just like everyone else? Because the truth is, breaking free from something like this isn't as simple as walking away. It means burning bridges, betraying the only family you've ever known, and stepping into a world that may not welcome you either. For the girl, that choice never came. Her father's grip was too tight, and her brother's shadow too close. The cycle continued, and the scars deepened. By now, the girl was no longer a child. She had become a woman shaped by silence, her life defined not by what she chose, but by what was taken from her. The years blurred together, each one marked by whispers of more pregnancies, more children born of the same blood. Some survived, others didn't. Those who lived bore the unmistakable signs of what happens when nature's limits are pushed too far. Her father aged but did not weaken. Men like him rarely do, not because their bodies remain strong, but because fear is their greatest weapon. He carried himself like a king of a ruined kingdom, convinced his way was destiny. And his son, her brother, followed close behind, inheriting not just his father's mannerisms, but his sins. What should have been rebellion turned into mimicry. What should have been protection became repetition. The mother's presence dwindled to nothing, a shadow fading into the background until her name was no longer spoken. Perhaps she had given up. Perhaps she had been broken long before her daughter ever drew breath. In houses like this, silence swallows everyone eventually. The town around them carried on as if nothing had happened. They saw the strange children, the crooked faces, the eyes that never seemed to focus. They heard the rumors, but they looked the other way, because to confront it would mean acknowledging that their own community had failed. And so the shack remained, a scar tucked into the landscape, its walls echoing with cries no one dared to interrupt. The girl, now woman, knew there was no rescue coming, no sheriff, no preacher, no neighbor was going to step forward. Her world was her prison, and the locks weren't made of iron, but of fear, shame, and blood. And in that prison, her children grew, marked from the moment they were conceived. Some say she dreamed of running away, that she whispered to her children about a place beyond. The hills where roads stretched out like veins and the air smelled different, but dreams in that house were dangerous. Dreams meant hope, and hope was the one thing her father could never allow, Because hope is the first crack in silence, and silence was the only thing keeping his empire intact. The girl's name has faded, her face lost to time, the records are scarce, the details scattered. All that remains is the story, carried forward through whispers and fragments, through children whose bloodlines still ripple in hidden corners of America. Families like hers did not vanish. They did not disappear when the shack rotted into the earth. They live on, in bodies, in memories, in the silence of towns that would rather forget. The child she bore grew into adulthood, carrying the curse in its veins. Some say the deformities worsened with each generation. Others claim that in some strange way, life found a way to adapt, to cling on, even when the odds were stacked against it. Either way, the truth is unavoidable. What began as loyalty to family ended as a legacy of suffering. We like to think stories like this are rare, buried deep in forgotten hills, isolated in time and place. But history shows otherwise. Inbreeding has left its mark, not just on nameless families, but on entire communities. Behind polite facades, behind locked doors, the cycle repeats in ways most would never dare to imagine. And when the silence holds, when the neighbors look away, when the law refuses to step in, darkness thrives. The girl never escaped. Her life remained bound to the very people who betrayed her. She died as she lived, silenced, controlled, her story nearly erased. But the scars she left behind, the children, the rumors, the bloodline, continue to haunt those who stumble across them. Tonight, you've glimpsed what few are ever allowed to see. A piece of American history that is not written in textbooks, not spoken in classrooms, not remembered in family albums. And perhaps that's why it lingers. Because what we bury is never truly gone. It waits. So when you drive through the back roads, past the collapsed barns and the houses sinking into the earth, remember, some of those places held secrets darker than you can imagine. Secrets like hers. And if you listen closely enough, you might still hear them. The cries of children born from silence, from betrayal, from bloodlines that should never have crossed. Because in the end, this was never just the story of one girl. It is the story of what happens when silence is stronger than truth. And the question that remains is chilling. How many more stories like hers still lie hidden, waiting to be uncovered?